Welcome to the new video of NeuroPhilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin. Asterisk, the habit of availability. Eleanor's mornings began long before the sun had gathered enough strength to paint the sky with pastel hues. Before her feet even touched the cool hardwood floor, she reached instinctively for her phone, an appendage of her consciousness. A gentle chime awakened her more reliably than any alarm clock, pulling her into a cascade of notifications, messages from friends, emails from colleagues, reminders she herself had set days before. She padded to the kitchen, brewed coffee with mechanical precision, and settled at her desk by breakfast time mug in hand, thumb poised over the screen. In those first 30 minutes of each day, Eleanor replied to every ping and buzz, her responses unfailingly prompt. There was comfort in the ritual. The steady rhythm of questions and answers lulled her into believing she was indispensable. A linchpin whose absence would unleash chaos. Over the years, this habit grew into an unspoken expectation. Serena, her oldest friend, relied on Eleanor's midnight counsel when heartbreak left her sleepless. Eleanor would listen tone steady, eyes bright on video calls through Serena's tears and anguished sighs, offering reassurance that felt more professional than personal. At the office, late-night emergencies ruled the roost. A missing slide in a client deck, a data discrepancy discovered moments before a presentation, a last-minute policy change. Each time, Eleanor dropped whatever she was doing, lunch, leisure, or even sleep, to take care of it. She prided herself on never missing a beat, never letting anyone down. Even if it cost her precious hours of rest, yet beneath the veneer of efficiency, Eleanor felt a creeping exhaustion. Our days blurred into one another, stitched together by urgent demands from every direction. She answered texts from relatives seeking advice on minor disputes. She joined group chats to mediate workplace conflicts. She even agreed to pet sit for neighbors on nights she would rather have spent curled up with a novel. Conversation became an endless checklist. Someone posed a question. She provided an answer, then immediately moved on to the next item. When she dared to mention fatigue, friends offered perfunctory sympathy before returning to their own priorities. She had become air necessary for survival. A case? Yet, easy to take for granted. Despite the toll on her energy, Eleanor resisted any thought of refusal. In her mind, availability equated to compassion, and compassion to virtue. To say no felt akin to betrayal. She feared that one refusal would unravel months or years of goodwill. In quiet moments, she rehearsed scripts to justify saying yes. If anyone questioned her boundaries, she would explain that she cared too much to let them down. On the rare occasions when her inner voice whispered that she deserved rest, she silenced it with self-reproach. I'm selfish, she told herself. Others need me. She never asked whether those urgent tasks truly necessitated her unique input, Nor did she consider that delegating or delaying might be equally effective. Then, on a seemingly ordinary Thursday evening, the pattern shattered. Eleanor sat slumped at her desk, the blue glow of her laptop illuminating dark circles beneath her eyes. She was ironing out a simple error in a coworker's spreadsheet, an error she had corrected countless times before. But tonight, her hands trembled, her vision swam, and each keystroke felt like wading through molasses. Her breath caught as she realized she could not summon the usual spark of determination. She paused, stared at the blinking cursor, and felt a surge of something unfamiliar, resistance. With deliberate slowness, she saved her progress, muted her notifications, and typed a terse message. "I'm off for the evening. Will resume tomorrow." Yes. Then she closed the laptop with a soft click. Silence descended like a physical weight. No urgent pings demanded her attention. No crisis erupted in her inbox. Instead, there was a hush so profound it seemed to echo. Eleanor's shoulders, heavy and hunched for weeks, dropped an inch as she exhaled. She sat still, listening to her own heartbeat, astonished at the absence of external command. She realized that the world outside her tiny circle of immediate responders did not collapse in her silence. Colleagues improvised temporary fixes. Friends found other confidants. Her neighborhood walked its rhythm unperturbed. The revelation hit her like a cool breeze. Her availability had never been indispensably, had simply been habitual. In that quiet, Eleanor felt a flicker of curiosity. She rose and walked to her window, watching the swaying branches of the maple tree outside, its leaves glowing amber in the street lamp's glow. She noticed things she had long overlooked: the gentle hush of passing cars, the distant laughter of children returning home, the night air tinged with wood smoke. For the first time in years, she felt fully present to her own senses. The compulsion to check her phone dissolved, and she embraced the stillness. That night, nestled on the sofa with a blank journal and a pen, Eleanor began to write. There were no action items, no solutions to offer, only questions. Who am I without my phone in my hand? What dreams did I abandon in the chase to be everywhere at once? With each line, she honored the dormant corners of her identity she had neglected. Tears came, unbidden but cleansing, as she recognized the freedom that lay in intentional absence. By the time she closed the journal, Eleanor understood that something fundamental had shifted. She had stopped being instantly available, and everything had changed. The first silence, Eleanor woke the next morning without her usual reflex. The phone lay face down beside her pillow, its screen dark. In years past, she would have reached immediately for a thumb-brushing unlocked display, eyes scanning dozens of notifications before consciousness fully returned. Today, she lays still for a moment, noticing the gentle rise and fall of her chest. The muted chirping of sparrows at the windowsill, the distant hum of early traffic. At last, she placed her feet on the floor, stretched, and padded to the kitchen. To brew coffee, Savoring the quiet, the ritual felt uncanny. She hadn't realized how conditioned she'd become to the constant digital chatter until it ceased, coffee in hand. Eleanor finally glanced at her silent phone. A dozen unread messages blinked. Serena's concern, "Are you okay?" 3 work emails marked urgent, a voicemail from her brother about car trouble. Her old impulse screamed, "Respond now." Instead, she remembered the soft power she'd felt when she closed her laptop last night. She resisted the reflex. Taking a steadying breath, she tapped clear all on her email app, deleting every message except to her mother's weekly check-in and an invitation from her neighbor, Mara, to grab coffee at 10. Everything else vanished into a deliberate void. Her pulse fluttered. Guilt coiled in her chest. What if she'd erased something truly important? But beneath the guilt lay a spark of exhilaration. She typed to her mother, "Good morning. Call this afternoon. Love you." See messaged Mara, "Perfect, see you at 10 a.m. Let's chat." And she let the rest remain unanswered. Her fingertip hovered for a moment before she dropped the phone on the counter. The act felt radical reclamation of agency. In that silence, she discovered a new sense of boundary. She would engage on her own terms, not everyone else's. By mid-morning, Eleanor noticed the world had not collapsed. At work, colleagues who once bombarded her after hours waited until her official on window. When she logged in at 9, her inbox contained polite, consolidated requests rather than an unmanageable stream. Clients adapted, scheduling meetings during business hours. A Slack message from her boss read simply, "Please review when convenient." No frantic follow-ups, no implied emergencies. Eleanor replied thoughtfully and felt gratitude brewing in return, rather than entitlement. She realized that when you stop being perpetually available, others learn to respect your time and communicate more mindfully. At 10, she strolled to the corner cafe where Mara already waved from a small table beneath a striped awning. The morning air felt crisp, the sky a pale blue expanse. They ordered lattes and almond croissants, then settled into conversation that flowed without digital interruptions. Mara spoke of a promotion she feared she wasn't ready for. Eleanor listened, asking questions but holding back advice until asked. She noticed the way sunlight warmed the cafe facade, the swirl of steam rising from their cups, the comforting aroma of fresh bread. She realized she had forgotten how deeply satisfying it could be to give someone your full, undivided attention. Back home before noon, Eleanor sat at her desk with a notebook and pen, no computer in sight. She sketched a schedule for herself, carving out device-free blocks each day to evening hours. 1 morning hour and an entire tech-free Sunday. She penciled in yoga classes, painting sessions, and blocks for uninterrupted writing. As she did so, she felt the novelty of choice. She could decide when to connect and when to withdraw. Each blank slot in the calendar shimmered with possibility. It occurred to her that her former availability had been less about caring and more about avoidance she had hidden from her own needs under the guise of helping everyone else. Later that afternoon, her brother called. In years past, a car breakdown at midnight would have triggered an immediate race to his side. Today, he spoke calmly. He'd arranged a tow through a roadside assistance app. "I'm fine," he said, "just waiting at a diner." Eleanor heard relief in his voice that he could handle a crisis independently. She resisted the urge to helicopter in. Instead, she asked about his plans for the weekend, letting the problem-solving space remain his own. Afterwards, she closed her eyes and breathed, marveling at how small it felt not to be everyone's first responder. As evening approached, Eleanor returned to the stillness of her apartment. She sat by the window with her journal and a cup of chamomile tea. She wrote, "Carl Jung said, when you stop being available, everything changes." He was right. She reflected on how the day's silence had shifted her perspective. She discovered that urgent demands need not override personal priorities, and that absence can foster appreciation rather than alienation. The edges of her former anxieties softened, replaced by a gentle curiosity about what lay beyond habitual busyness. Before bed, she glanced once more at her phone. 2 simple lines remained in her messages, her mother's and Mara's. Everything else had disappeared. She felt no pang of regret. Instead, she felt a growing sense of trust in herself to manage both connection and withdrawal. Device face down on the nightstand and lay back, eyes closed. In the hush, she heard her own heartbeat, steady and unhurried. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor welcomed the silent sand, wondered how far she might journey in its depths. The echo of absence. By the time the second week of Eleanor's new boundary experiment arrived, she noticed a subtle shift in her daily rhythms. She awoke more alert, her mind free of the habitual morning scramble to clear her inbox. At work, the once relentless cascade of after-hours pings had dwindled into a few respectful queries during office hours. In place of flurried urgency, colleagues approached her with thoughtful emails outlining problems and proposed solutions. Rather than expecting her to solve everything on demand, their tone had changed, no longer presuming her immediate availability. They communicated with greater care, and Eleanor found she could respond with depth rather than haste. One Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor decided to attend the open studio session at the Community Arts Center, a class she had bookmarked weeks earlier, but never actually tried. She arrived as the sunlight slanted through tall windows, dust motes dancing in golden shafts. Akiza around her, strangers dabbed at canvases, whispering encouragement. The instructor, a gentle-voiced painter named Jonas, guided each student with questions rather than directives, inviting them to interpret a single crimson stroke or a swirl of cobalt differently. Eleanor picked up a brush and hesitated, then let the bristles glide across the canvas, painting an abstract field of lavender and emerald. She realized she was painting not to produce a masterpiece, but to feel the soft resistance of bristles against fibers, the slow bloom of color. Hours drifted by as she lost herself in mixing pigments and layering strokes. When she finally stepped back, She saw the raw testament of her own presence, something she had rarely allowed herself to experience when she was tethered to her phone and her obligations. After class, Eleanor lingered to chat with Jonas. He asked what inspired the bold, green curves. "I'm exploring change," she said. Then learning to say no. She felt a tingle of pride as she said the words aloud. He nodded thoughtfully. Absence can be a powerful teacher. It shows you what you truly need. His words with her as she walked home through the park. The late day light soft on the leaves. That evening, she sat down to an empty apartment, no devices blinking at her. She brewed herbal tea, placed it beside her journal, and wrote about the painting class. She reflected on how presence and absence acted like opposing magnets, each revealing the other's shape. In the quiet, she confronted the knowledge that she had once defined herself entirely by her responsiveness to others' needs. Now she had tangible proof her lavender and emerald canvas that she had needs of her own. Desires she had postponed for too long. The following Saturday, Eleanor joined a local book club meeting at the old library on Maple Avenue. The book was a collection of essays on human connection, and she was struck by a passage about how relationships thrive when both parties maintain separate identities. At the meeting, a diverse group of neighbors gathered around a well-worn table. Each person spoke in turn about passages that resonated with them. A retiree found solace in quiet mornings alone. A single father related to the need for creative space. A graduate student confessed to having neglected friendships in pursuit of scholastic success. When it was Eleanor's turn, she described her experiment in availability and how it revealed both the fragility and the resilience of human bonds. Heads nodded in agreement. A woman named Priya leaned forward and said, "We've all felt taken for granted at times. It's brave to reclaim your time." In that moment, Eleanor felt connected in a new way, no longer as the fixer, but as an equal participant in shared exploration. By midweek, the most surprising development emerged. In Eleanor's relationship with her brother, Daniel. He called one evening, as usual, but this time he sounded more buoyant than anxious. He told her he had landed a freelance project he'd been pursuing for months. Instead of immediately hunkering down to help him navigate contracts and timelines, Eleanor chuckled and said, "You've got this, Danny. Let me know if you hit a snag." He paused, perhaps expecting the usual cascade of suggestions. Then he laughed too. "I appreciate it, Elle. Really, it feels good to figure things out on my own." In that brief exchange, Eleanor recognized a new dynamic. Absence allowed others to grow stronger, more self-reliant. She realized her unending availability had sometimes stifled the very independence she wanted to nurture in those she loved. The following day at work, her team organized a brainstorming session without her prompting. A colleague presented a fresh idea for streamlining their workflow. Another suggested rotating after-hours support among team members. When Eleanor logged on, she found meeting notes in her inbox, along with clear next steps. She could no longer micromanage every detail. Instead, her role shifted toward servant leadership, empowering others to step forward. Her inbox, once a gauntlet of demanding tasks, became a curated space for strategic input. One particularly transformative moment arrived 3 weeks into her experiment. Eleanor had accepted an invitation to volunteer at the community garden, tending plots of tomatoes and basil alongside local residents. As she knelt in the soft earth, weeding carefully, she struck up a conversation with Mrs. Alvarez, a retired schoolteacher. They spoke of soil and seasons, and of how a garden thrived on cycles of cultivation and rest. Mrs. Alvarez paused, wiping sweat from her brow, and said, "Even plants need a little fallow time to recover." Eleanor tucked the image into her mind. Her own life, she realized, needed fallow seasons too. Constant productivity had left her roots shallow. Now, she was learning to let parts of her life rest, replenishing energy for future growth. That night, with soil still under her fingernails, Eleanor treated herself to a long bath with scented oils. She closed her eyes against the steam and thought of her new experiences, the swirl of paint under her brush, the warm camaraderie of the book club, the earthy aroma of the garden. Each activity had been possible only because she allowed herself to be absent from her usual digital obligations. She realized that her life was no longer defined by her reaction to other people's demands, but by her own deliberate choices. In the days that followed, Eleanor encountered a few minor test cases. A friend from college sent a panicked text at midnight about a job rejection. Under her old pattern, Eleanor would have responded immediately, offering consolation and networking help. Instead, she drafted a thoughtful message in the morning. "I'm sorry you're hurting. Let's talk this afternoon if you'd like." The friend replied with gratitude, and their late-night anguish seemed less urgent in the clear light of day. Another colleague pinged her urgent data question late on a Friday. Eleanor waited until Monday morning to send a detailed response and heard nothing but thanks. These incidents reminded her that absence could even reshape urgency, converting it into considered reflection. Late one evening, Eleanor revisited her journal entry from the book club meeting. Absence reveals the threads that truly bind us. She added her own epigraph below it. In stepping back, we step forward. She marveled at how Jung's simple insight had propelled her into a richer, more nuanced existence. She had once feared that silence would be a void. Instead, it had become a vessel, one that held new experiences, restored energy, and fostered authentic connections. Before bed, Eleanor drafted her next week's calendar. More painting classes, another book club selection, a scheduled block of free writing, and 2 evenings locked away from devices. She even penciled in a weekend retreat, a solitary cabin by the lake. As she closed her planner, she felt neither guilt nor hesitation. Rather, she felt a steady glow of anticipation. The echo of her absence had revealed not emptiness, but possibility. And in that echo, she heard the promise of a life lived on. Her own terms, rich with presence, resilience, and self-discovery. The mirror within, Eleanor's mornings had grown ritualistic in a new way. She rose at dawn, not to answer emails, but to sit quietly by the window with a cup of jasmine tea and her journal. The soft light filtered through gauzy curtains, warming the pages as she wrote. This was no longer an afterthought squeezed between digital demands. It was the first task of her day, a sacred hour to observe her own mind. She recorded dream snatches of conversation, vivid images, and began to spot patterns, recurring fears, hopes she'd abandoned, the memories she had buried beneath obligations. In these pages, Eleanor confronted the truth she had long avoided. She had been so busy rescuing everyone else that she had lost touch with herself. One afternoon, Eleanor bought a small hand mirror with an ornate silver frame at a thrift shop. At first, she intended it as decoration, but when she held it up to her face, she saw more than reflection. She saw the flicker of fatigue around her eyes, the tension in her jaw. She carried the mirror home and placed it on her writing desk, where its curved surface caught the light every morning. She made it a point to look at herself for a full minute each day, breathing slowly and noting what she saw. Sometimes she recognized her own vulnerability, a quivering lip as she remembered childhood anxieties, a softened gaze when she acknowledged past losses. Other times, she witnessed her resilience, the set of her shoulders as she committed to new boundaries, the quiet determination in her eyes when she faced discomfort head-on. Eleanor realized that asking for help was another boundary she had to learn. In her previous life, she had believed that vulnerability equaled weakness. Now she understood it as an act of courage. One evening, she confided in Mara, her neighbor and confidantable, the lingering loneliness she sometimes felt. Even amid genuine companionship, she admitted that despite newfound freedom, she occasionally missed being needed. Mara listened without judgment and offered simple reassurance. "You deserve kindness too." Encouraged, Eleanor reached out to her mentor, Clara, requesting feedback on a personal project she had shelved years ago. When Clara responded with warmth and constructive insight, Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude and relief. She discovered that relationships grown on mutual support were far more nourishing than those built solely on her self-sacrifice. At work, Eleanor's transformation rippled outward. She began each team meeting with a brief mindfulness exercise. 2 minutes of focused breathing, and invited colleagues to share reflections not only on projects but on how they felt. Initially, some participants rolled their eyes. They were accustomed to a brisk agenda. But within weeks, the room's atmosphere shifted. People spoke more honestly about workload stress and celebrated small wins. Eleanor noticed that when she admitted her own limitations, respectful, "I can't tackle this until Tuesday," rather than a hasty yes, others felt sanctioned to do the same. The team's productivity improved not because they worked harder, but because they communicated more clearly and prioritized tasks with shared understanding. One evening, Eleanor attended a guided workshop on vulnerability hosted by a local community center. The facilitator, a clinical psychologist named Dr. Simmons, invited participants to pair up and share a personal story they seldom told. Eleanor hesitated, her old self urging her to perform, to provide a polished anecdote. Instead, she spoke of the moment she collapsed at her desk, overwhelmed by the weight of constant availability and the shame she felt afterward. When she finished, her partner, a playwright named Marcus, thanked her for her honesty and confessed his own fear of failure. In that exchange, Eleanor recognized a profound truth. When we show our fragile selves, we permit others to do the same. The mirror within did not only reflect her image, it revealed the unseen connections that bind human hearts. Emboldened by this insight, Eleanor revived projects long postponed. She opened her laptop one Saturday morning and drafted the outline of a personal essay. She had dreamt of writing an exploration of availability, boundaries, and self-discovery. She welcomed feedback from trusted peers rather than waiting for perfection. She also enrolled in a weekend cooking class, determined to learn a new skill purely for pleasure, not productivity. Faces concentrated over simmering sauces and diced vegetables. She laughed at her own early missteps and savored the rich aroma of her creations. Each small success felt magnified by the freedom she had carved out. Her cooking was delicious not because she Instagrammed it instantly, but because she had experienced the full process undistracted. Yet the mirror within also revealed lingering fears. One morning, as Eleanor gazed at her reflection, she noticed a shadow of doubt in her eyes. The question of whether she was letting others down by keeping stricter boundaries. She remembered the harsh voice in her head. What if they stop calling? What if they learn to do without you? For a moment, panic fluttered in her chest. Then she closed her eyes, faded the inner critic with slow breaths, and asked herself, "What do I want?" The answer came softly. "I want presence, not performance." She vowed to honor that desire, even if it meant disappointing expectations. She laid down her pen and decided to spend the weekend offline, hiking along the river trail and journaling beside the water dot on Monday. As she returned to her usual schedule, Eleanor noticed something remarkable. The world had not unraveled. In fact, conversations with friends and colleagues felt more engaged. People greeted her with genuine warmth rather than relief at her compliance. A coworker remarked, "I missed our thoughtful discussions. You bring perspective." A friend texted, "Your absence made me realize how much I value your friendship." Eleanor understood that stepping back had deepened her relationships rather than weakening them. That evening, Eleanor stood before the hand mirror on her desk. She studied her reflection, the lines on her face, the slight upturn of her lips. She realized that within those contours lay her own evolving story, a narrative of self-discovery, courage, and authenticity. She whispered to her reflection, "I see you," and allowed herself to feel the full weight of those words. The mirror had shown her many truths, her vulnerabilities, her strengths, her deepest longings. Now it reminded her of what lay ahead. The ongoing work of aligning her life with her values, of choosing presence over ceaseless availability. In that moment, Eleanor closed the journal on her lap and set down the mirror. She reached for her phone still face down and paused. Then, With a gentle resolve, she slid it into a drawer. Stood, stretching her arms wide, as though greeting the room with an open heart. The mirror within no longer reflected a woman, captive to others' needs. It reflected a woman awake to her own worth, a woman who had learned that the most radical act of kindness begins with oneself. And in that reflection, she saw the promise of a life lived fully on her own terms. The landscape transformed. Eleanor stood at the podium of the light-filled auditorium, recalling her first faltering step into intentional unavailability just over a year ago. The audience professionals, community advocates, and curious onlookers lined in as she spoke of setting firm boundaries, of the quiet power released when she chose to stop responding to every ping. She described feeling hollow and overextended, then discovering unexpected clarity in deliberate absence. She shared anecdotes of freed-up mornings spent painting watercolors, of the deep calm of scheduled digital detoxes, and of the richly transformed quality of her relationships. Her tone was confident but gentle, each phrase weighted with the sincerity of lived experience. When she finished, the room was still for a heartbeat, then erupted into warm applause. Back in her office, Eleanor noticed colleagues greeting her with genuine warmth rather than relief. Her team, once reliant on her immediate input, had grown. More resourceful, dividing tasks, scheduling check-ins within business hours, and thriving in the space her boundaries created. When Eleanor joined meetings, her contributions were more focused and strategic. She proposed sustainable solutions rather than reactive fixes. Across the division, productivity metrics improved. Fewer late-night tasks, more collaborative brainstorming sessions, and a healthier balance between deadlines and downtime. Eleanor watched this transformation with satisfaction, understanding that absence had become a catalyst for collective growth, empowering others to step into roles they had hesitated to occupy before. In her personal life, Eleanor's calendar blossomed with pursuits she had long sidelined. She enrolled in advanced painting workshops, dove into local theater productions as an extra, and scheduled weekly hikes to remote trails. Each activity was a conscious choice, an affirmation of presence rather than default availability. She painted canvases that captured the flickering light of dawn, performed silent support roles backstage that taught her humility, and climbed rugged paths to sit in silent awe of sprawling landscapes. These experiences nourished her creativity and resilience. They reminded her that her value was not measured by productivity alone, but by the richness of her engagement with the world and herself. Her relationships with loved ones deepened as, family dinners evolved into open dialogues where each person felt heard. Her mother shared stories of her own youthful struggles. Her brother talked excitedly about his new projects, and old friends dropped by without wreaths of expectation. When one friend confessed anxiety over a new career path, Eleanor listened without immediately offering solutions. Instead, she sat with her friend's uncertainty and asked thoughtful questions. These conversations were richer, infused with empathy rather than efficiency. Eleanor realized that true connection thrived on mutual vulnerability, not on the ceaseless rhythm of rescue and response that had once defined her. Eleanor's engagement extended into the broader community, too. She joined a neighborhood mentorship circle, guiding young adults in career planning while learning from their fresh perspectives. At the community garden, she taught sustainable gardening techniques learned the previous season and worked side by side with neighbors from all walks of life. She volunteered to moderate a local panel on digital well-being, sharing her own journey and fielding questions about setting boundaries in a hyper-connected era. These roles grounded her in shared purpose. She witnessed how collective efforts, when balanced by respect for individual time, produced vibrant results: community garden brimming with produce, a mentorship program flourishing with confident participants. Throughout this transformation, Eleanor kept returning to Jung's words, "You stop being available, and everything changes." Each day, she rediscovered layers of herself she had long neglected. She journaled about childhood dreams of teaching art, the long-discarded lyric poems she once wrote, and the aspirations she had shelved for fear of failure. In solitude, she confronted the echoes of past choices, moments when she had prioritized others at her own expense. But solitude also became a source of insight, revealing her authentic voice. She realized that presence, both for oneself and for others, demanded balance. It was not enough to be present. One had to choose presence consciously and generously. Eleanor's daily routines now reflected her intentional practice. She began each morning with 15 minutes of silent meditation, then reviewed her priorities for the day, distinguishing must-do tasks from optional engagements. She checked her messages only within scheduled windows, allowing her to immerse fully in work, hobbies, or rest without distraction. Afternoons often found her at the art studio or walking along the riverbank, notebook in hand, capturing observations and sketches. Evenings were reserved for meaningful conversation, exercise, or reading, never for endless scrolling. When unexpected requests arrived outside her hours, she acknowledged them promptly at the next opportunity, reinforcing clear boundaries while maintaining goodwill. As word of her experience spread, Eleanor began mentoring others in the art of mindful availability. She hosted small workshops on digital well-being, guiding participants through exercises to identify personal boundaries and reclaim leisure time. She wrote blog posts and recorded podcasts, distilling her journey into practical advice. Start with 1 hour of silence each day. Journal the thoughts that arise. Honor the activity you have long postponed. Readers reached out, sharing breakthroughs and setbacks. Message reminded Eleanor that her absence had created space not only for her growth but for others to flourish. Through teaching, she deepened her own understanding of presence, recognizing it as a gift to share. On a tranquil evening by the lakeshore, Eleanor paused to watch twilight's reflections ripple across the water. She thought about her journey from the old habit of relentless responsiveness to the liberated rhythm of conscious engagement. She understood now that boundaries were not walls to keep people out, but gateways to inner freedom that enhanced connection rather than diminishing it. The world around her glowed softly with possibility, every distant light a testament to lives reshaped by mindful absence. With a peaceful smile, Eleanor closed her eyes and breathed deeply, honoring the path she had walked. Everything had changed, and in that change, she had found herself in her final reflection. Eleanor realized that this journey was not an endpoint, but the beginning of ever-evolving possibilities.